Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News Media Day for the Imola Grand Prix and major upgrades being unveiled by multiple teams this weekend. Ferrari with a couple of changes certainly to the rear of their car. Red Bull with some very obvious changes to their sidepods. We'll get into what that might potentially look like. Mercedes cooking up a major upgrade package on the weekend as well. Is it going to work for any of these teams as they look to chase down McLaren? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Just a quick crossover here from the intro. If you guys follow my esports stuff, you'll probably know 100 Thieves as an organisation, Nature, all the guys over there. Thought it was pretty mad today to see Kimi Antonelli wander in the paddock in a bit of 100 Thieves merchandise, but thought that was pretty cool. Now, speaking of Antonelli, here he is in front of the team and his entire school, at least his class. Seems like obviously he doesn't go to school, I imagine, too far from here, and they decided, you know what, let's make it into a school trip for the weekend. So I thought that was really cool. We'll see how Antonelli does. It's a big talking point of the weekend. I'm sure that while all the Tifosi will be supporting Ferrari, I'm sure there's going to be lots of optimism and hype around Antonelli because it's been a while since we've had an Italian driver, and the last Italian driver we had in Giovinazzi has done great things in the World Endurance Championship since, but at the time as an F1 driver didn't really set the world on fire. Antonelli has that potential. He's the most promising Italian driver in a very long time, and I'm sure the fans are going to come up big time this weekend to support him. Whether the Mercedes upgrades are going to be enough, that is a question. Not a great start to the weekend for Charles Leclerc. He's feeling unwell today. I know there's been some people saying, oh, here we go again. Albon, Sainz, now potentially Leclerc, but I don't think that's going to be happening. The appendicitis stuff, he's probably going to be fine. It happens every so often. Drivers are unwell. They take a rest on the media day. They're back in the car on the Friday. That's probably what we're going to see. Now, Franz Hermann, aka Max Verstappen, was there for media day today, and he was actually asked the question as he walked into the paddock, what's going on with Franz Hermann, right? Where did that name come from? And he said some interesting words here. Now, if you guys didn't see the news the other day, Max was at the Nordschleife doing some testing, trying to get his license, and he went under the name of Franz Hermann, and he says that Franz Hermann's actually negotiating some contracts right now for the Nordschleife. So pretty interesting. And there was a couple of articles about this actually. So Max explained why he went under this fake name. Now, he knew that people were going to know that it was him. That wasn't rocket science. The only reason why he did it, he says, is that if you go under a fake name, that means that on the entry sheet, you're not noticed until you actually arrive, because if you put your name down on the entry sheet as Max Verstappen, all of a sudden word gets out and it's a bit, it could be pretty chaotic right in the morning. Max knew that obviously there was going to be attention there, but he bought himself a good couple of hours with the Franz Hermann gimmick. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. He actually did confirm that he did break the lap record in the GT3, which is absolutely insane. I mean, look, it's Max Verstappen. He's driven the track a million times on the simulator, but barely ever, if ever, in real life, and apparently on his third lap was right there, if not faster than the record. Now, there are some caveats in terms of balance of performance and setup and these other things, and it wasn't an official record for various reasons, but apparently Helmut Marko said that he was tinkering with the suspension and, getting into all the details of it even more so than he does in Formula 1 sometimes. So I think that might tell you something about where Max Verstappen sees his future in racing. Max has made it pretty clear that he definitely feels he's closer to his final race in Formula 1 than he is to his first, which was, kind of makes sense given that this is his 11th year in F1. But the discussion certainly continues on Max and his future and whether there's a world where he even steps away at the end of the season, takes a sabbatical year, comes back in 2027 when he knows what team is the best. That's a possibility maybe, and here he is at media day today answering rather a lot of questions in front of the media. So this is the way that things are done nowadays, because we know that Max in the press conferences doesn't necessarily want to speak his mind. Few other updates around the grid. Carlos Sainz Sr. is going to give it a go probably to become FIA president, although that we know that Mohammed Ben Sulayem, as we talked about yesterday, is, let's say, scheming up ideas to shut that whole thing down. Carlos Sainz Jr. though says, look, in that type of scenario, they would part ways in the sense that he would no longer be involved, Sainz Sr., in any of his management or any of his dealings, and that would be understandable. I know that there was talk yesterday about conflict of interest, right? This seems to be the key point that Ben Sulayem would potentially make. The rumour has it that they might potentially change the rules. At least Ben Sulayem is trying to change the rules so that the ethics committee could shut down anyone with any potential integrity issues, which may include conflict of interest with a son in one of the categories. The reality is, people don't just wake up one morning and say, you know what, I'm going to be the FIA president, right? Like, people who are going to be in that role have connections, have experience in motorsport, in FIA motorsport series for likely decades to that point. You're not really going to find any candidate that doesn't have connections in the space that couldn't, potentially be considered a conflict of interest. So I think that's why what we discussed yesterday was so concerning, is that whoever your candidate is, you're going to find potential conflicts of interest. So, there's obviously a reason why people are saying, look, Carlos Sainz Sr. would theoretically be able to manage that one. Just quickly on Adrian Newey, we just talked about his thoughts yesterday on the Aston Martin factory. This season, though, it's not like they're doing much. However, I thought Aston would do a Williams and put 100% of their work into next year, which is what Williams say that they are doing. But actually, no, reports have it that Aston Martin still have this year's car in the wind tunnel sometimes, just to understand what's gone wrong, basically, because they thought they had a pretty radical change. Maybe Newey is even sitting there thinking, guys, I'm trying to focus on 2026 here, and you're telling me, hey, look at this old car, what did we do wrong? And I'm sure there are learnings from that, but it's still a bit of a problem when Williams and other teams are putting their full focus and Aston Martin are still using some of the time on this car to solve some issues. Maybe even they don't want to solve them, they just want to understand what, let's say, weakness in their thinking approach caused them to get to this point. But actually this weekend, Aston Martin do have quite a considerable upgrade. Now, you know who's getting that upgrade? It's Lance Stroll as it stands. I don't think Alonso is actually going to get it yet, but we'll see if that transpires over the course of the weekends. Whether it does anything, of course, is a different question. Franco's back in the paddock. He's going to be driving the Alpine this weekend instead of Jack Doohan. There was lots of talk about Colapinto's return, and actually a number of the other rookies were asked about it to kind of give their perspective on whether they think it was harsh, the demotion for Doohan. And it is interesting when you look at the rookies, because the rookies this year generally have been pretty impressive. But the rookies that have been more impressive are arguably the ones that are under less pressure. Depends the way you look at it, because Antonelli's obviously under pressure driving for Mercedes in a car that's, pole position ready, as Antonelli has proven, maybe race winning ready at some point. But the drivers under the most pressure, arguably Lawson was there. Going into Red Bull as he did at the start of the season, the pressure was on, didn't deliver. Doohan was under pressure because Colapinto was on the sidelines and everyone was talking about it. The rookies that aren't under so much pressure, and in my opinion, I didn't really expect that much of Lawson and Doohan. But then again, I didn't either of Hadjar, and he's been exceptionally good compared to my expectations. But he's not under as much pressure, right? Maybe that will change. But I think there is a correlation anyway between Behrman, Bortoleto to some degree, and as we say, Hadjar and Antonelli. They're performing better than Doohan and Lawson have done, and they're under less pressure, so it might make some sense there, really. You look at the success of the rookies compared to the amount of pressure that they might be under, and as Hadjar says, I didn't have a gun to my head. Even before the season, it smelled a bit bad, because I think he entered the season with a lot of pressure and expectations, not really a good environment. It feels quite unfair, because 6 races in, he didn't have much time to show anything, and it's not like he had a rocket ship, so a bit harsh to get rid of him. I didn't have a gun to my head before starting the season, so that was helpful, and I had a good support here since day one, so that was definitely helping. So, criticising the Alpine setup and the Alpine decision. Behrman says a similar thing and says that it was a horrible situation. I feel like his treatment was very unfair, especially because I think Doohan realistically knew before the season started there was a very good chance exactly this happened exactly when it did, and he was getting quizzed on the media, by the media about it all the time. It was a really tough spot, and look, Alpine do not set their drivers up for much success. I think we can fairly comfortably say that. Speaking of Alpine drivers, here's of course Oscar Piastri now made a rather good decision to go to McLaren. He did talk about the fact that this could be Imola's real last appearance on the calendar, potentially. It's likely that Monza will be the only Italian Grand Prix to stay. That's been a talking point for some time. But speaking of McLaren, it has been confirmed and officially written off that the FIA investigated the McLaren machine heavily during the Miami weekends, and they found nothing of the sort that Red Bull were theorising around their tyre temperature control and their brakes. So McLaren have been cleared of using any liquid to cool their tyres, which is pretty interesting. This, of course, was the whole tyre water phenomenon. Miami, they checked it thoroughly. That's not what they're doing. Is it purely airflow, the way that McLaren are managing the brake temperatures and therefore managing the tyre temperatures around the brakes? Maybe, maybe not. You know, they could be using liquid in some other form, or they could be using some sort of phase-changing material that isn't really liquid, but it still consumes energy in a certain very sophisticated way. You know, but they're not putting water in the tyres. That's the takeaway. McLaren, though, are probably doing other very intelligent things, and the other teams are trying to figure that out. Ferrari have an idea, and they're going to put it into practice this weekend, we'll get to in a second. Now, Aston Martin, they do have an improvement in aerodynamic load and the consistency of the load, new floor and new top bodywork, and yeah, it's going to be on Lance Stroll's car, so it is classic, isn't it, really? I know that Stroll, to be fair to him, does have significantly more points in the championship than Fernando, so this is actually justifiable this time, rather than when it's usually a little bit controversial, which this still would be, because like Alonso might not be the driver that he was, but he's still the stronger driver of the pairing. You know, even the race pace stats this year do show that in reality it's just that Stroll's brought home the points so far. Now, Racing Bulls have a substantial upgrade too. Apparently it's a pretty big package, bigger than Red Bull Racing's package. They started the season very strongly. The last few rounds it's not been quite as strong for the Racing Bulls, so they'll be hoping to turn that around this weekend. But again, the upgrades now are not going to be giving you half a second, right? Like, it's just not possible at this time of the regulations, you would well think. This is the Red Bull, the RB21, and the changes that they are making to it. Now, this is a smaller package than we thought it might originally be. There was discussion around Red Bull Imola upgrades. This was going to be the big deal. These were going to be the big changes to the car. But actually, as it's turned out, Christian Horner was asked about it and says, I don't really know what you're talking about with this major package. Now, I mean, again, it's a classic Red Bull, because Helmut Marko said to the media that they've got a big package for Imola, and now Christian Horner saying, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. It's nothing major, nothing substantial, and maybe he's trying to cover his own back, because the rumour, of course, being that if these upgrades fail, Horner's job might be on the line. So Horner's probably within his rights to say, look, there's nothing, no big deal here, no major changes, we're not expecting much. So maybe if things don't work out as well as plans, then they can say, oh, it wasn't meant to do much anyway. But I think the real point is they've split the upgrades across multiple Grand Prix. The intention, I think, initially was to bring major changes to Imola, but actually they brought their new floor tweak to Miami instead. They only had one version for Max. They're going to have the other version here for Yuki. And like, everything on these cars is intertwined. The upper bodywork, how that interacts with the floor, that's a big deal, right? Now, they don't have the best wind tunnel in the world. Adrian Newey made that very clear. He said they had one of the worst on the grid, the Red Bull guys, compared to what Aston Martin are using today. But these are some of the most obvious changes to what we currently see with the Red Bull. And again, these are substantial. You can certainly notice a pretty significant difference, but it's not like there's so many changes to the car. I think the plan is to bring, well, the floor that they brought to Miami, they're bringing this change in bodywork here to Imola, and then more to come in Spain. So the upgrade is quite substantial, but they're not bringing it all at once. If they brought it all at once, then it would probably be considered a major upgrade. They bring in bits and pieces. But the point is, I mean, the main thing that you'll note here really is the way that the wing mirror is now housed. It does appear as well that the intake for the sidepod has been changed. This is the older version on the left-hand side. This is the newer version on the right-hand side. You know, a little bit of a different shape, and obviously it doesn't go out quite as wide. It still has this vertical segment, which they introduced last year, which other teams have to some degree adopted, but it's a bit more of a P shape than we have seen otherwise, and it takes on a little bit more of the kind of echoes of the McLaren and even the Ferrari concept than what Red Bull started the year with. But the most noticeable thing really is this is where the wing mirror was mounted before on this element here. Look at where the wing mirror is mounted now on this kind of outcrop thing, and it just juts up at the ends. So again, this piece here is definitely going to be an aerodynamic tool that they use to create some vortices onto the back of the car. The main feeling is this is, you know, about the rear tyres. I know that the guys at Auto Racer did some analysis on what they think this is going to change, this kind of new outwash phenomenon, because they've got this new wing element now that holds up the wing mirror, and that's going to craft some airflow towards the rear of the car in a way that they think is going to be beneficial. So look, is it going to solve their issues with the understeer that is coming into the car, with the rear brakes and the tyre temperatures getting out of control on certain circuits compared to the McLaren? It's maybe not going to be a radical change, but it's at least something, and something that maybe will take them a step in the right direction. So yeah, just by way of comparison here, you guys can tell some of these shots between the left and the right hand side. Newer version on the left, and then the older version with a much wider sidepod inlet, and then the wing mirror being mounted in a very different way between the both of them. And there's some more images right here that you guys can feast your eyes onto. There's also this other element at the back. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there's this other like winglet element that Red Bull have brought on as well. So look, these are quite substantial changes. At this point in the regulation cycle, with all of the advantages McLaren have, it's probably not going to be an absolute game changer, but I guess we'll see. This is kind of another look of that new element as well. It's kind of a little bit unclear exactly what it is and what it's meant to do. Maybe it's actually a little duct in there. Looks like there might be some airflow could go through there. Look, am I going to analyse whether it's going to make the car quicker or not and how? I don't know. Red Bull clearly think that it will. Whether it does, we'll see this weekend whether they can get it dialed in. But this is quite a nice little angle here, actually, comparing the new version here at the top and the way that the wing mirror now looks with this very extended winglet section here compared to what it used to look like at the bottom, where it would be mounted on top of it, and, the overbite is far less extreme. I know that Red Bull have messed around a lot with the overbite, but, I mean, yeah, have a look at that. This is actually probably the best shot of the lot, isn't it, really, to compare the Imola version up top with what they used to do at the bottom. So yeah, substantial changes. Is it going to change much with the performance of the car? Because, look, it's not a suspension change. It's not a change of the brake duct to the rear. And maybe that's where the battlegrounds really are at the moment. So, yeah, there was some discussion on it. Dr. Robs did some analysis and says that, maybe not going to be anything crazy, but it's going to be something that hopefully takes them in the right direction. And if it can help control some of the rear tyre temperatures with the way they're using the airflow, that is going to be a big deal as well. Now, speaking of that, this is Ferrari with some changes to their brake ducts. Now, look, can we really look at this and determine exactly what they're doing? No, because a lot of the magic here of these brakes is hidden under the duct itself. You can't really see all that much of it. It's not like the car crashes, you pick the car up, you can see the floor, you can see all the intricate details. A lot of the stuff in the brakes are hidden behind, the cover. But they are testing a revised rear brake duct here to try and optimize the airflow and improve tyre temp management, concept inspired by McLaren. They're not considering it an upgrade. People aren't really talking about it like, wow, it's a major upgrade, but it's, well, we talked about it being an experiment, and it may or may not work. We'll see, but it's a big deal if they can get this right, and maybe they need to get this right if they're going to turn the year around. Let's talk Mercedes, though, because of all the teams bringing a package, we've not seen much of the Mercedes yet, but, because a couple of hours ago, they were still putting the thing together, and it was going to take a bit of time until we really saw any of the actual changes on the car. But they've said, and Kimi Antonelli has said that, yeah, this weekend he's optimistic that they're going to bring some serious changes that are going to push them in the right direction. And look, who knows, maybe Mercedes can finally do it, have a solid mechanical base and add more performance. They're bringing some substantial changes. There's potentially some revised bodywork. I know people have been looking at this and suggesting whether these elements here are substantially wider than they used to be. I guess really what you might want to look at here is kind of the cannons on the backside and whether they've changed to some extent. But it might just be perspective which makes it look like this. The only change that I've really seen so far that Albert Fabrega points out is this one. So this is on the rear wishbone of the suspension, and you guys can see how they've redesigned the profile of it to have this little, sticky uppy bit, as it were, which is, going to generate some vortices of the airflow. So pretty much this is all we're seeing. The major change, though, to the Mercedes we won't see, because the major change, it seems, is going to be to the floor. That's the rumour anyway, that they've got a new floor for this weekend. And, the floor is a key performance differentiator. But a few tweaks here and there at the bodywork, and then mainly changes underneath the floor. But Red Bull, we have some quite substantial differences. Ferrari, Mercedes, but of course McLaren, regardless, are still going to be the favourites for the weekend. So very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Just one final thing. There is no changes to the DRS zone. We know that last year, and for many years, when we've actually had an Imola Grand Prix, because a couple of years ago, of course, it didn't happen because of the floods and everything, 2021 was chaotic, to say the very least, and obviously it was rain affected. Not sure that's going to be the case this weekend with the forecast as it stands, but the DRS zone is set to stay the same. I know there's obviously been talk about it because in Miami they extended it on the back straight or the back curvy straight by quite some distance, I think like 75 meters, and it, whether you'd say it improved racing or not, I mean, DRS you might argue is kind of fraudulent racing, it's kind of fake overtakes and whatever. Some would argue. I don't think that's fully true, but sometimes DRS DRS can make it too easy. But we saw last year in Imola that realistically it was impossible to pass. Like, unless you had a substantial delta on the car in front, the DRS simply wasn't powerful enough. So I thought they might tweak it and make it, 50 meters longer, maybe. But no, they're going to keep it exactly as it is, even though this year the dirty area is even worse. So let's just say, don't expect fireworks this weekend, and the qualifying championship, as Fred Vasseur calls it, may well continue. But very much enjoyed your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.